January 1943, the Philippine Sea just after dawn. The water is calm, a flat gray mirror broken only by the slow passage of steel hulls. Japanese escort ships cut through the surface in disciplined formation. Engines hum steadily. Lookouts scan an empty horizon. Below them, the ocean appears lifeless, silent, safe, and without warning, the sea itself seems to inhale. Somewhere beneath the convoy, something unseen slips away into the depths, leaving nothing behind but uncertainty. This moment mattered because it revealed a fracture in a belief the Imperial Japanese Navy had carried since the opening days of the war. Japan had entered World War II convinced that control of the surface meant control of the sea. Battleships, carriers, escorts, and doctrine were built around visible power. The ocean, they believed, could be dominated by formations, discipline, and courage. What they underestimated was invisibility. What they feared once they encountered it was silence. American submarines did not announce themselves. They did not challenge fleets head-on. They did not trade honor for honor. They waited. They listened. And then they disappeared. At the start of the Pacific War, Japanese officers expected submarines to behave as they had in earlier conflicts, limited in range, unreliable, vulnerable. Japanese naval doctrine placed little emphasis on anti-submarine warfare. Training focused on decisive fleet engagements on aircraft carriers and battleships meeting in climactic battles. Submarines were considered secondary threats, nuisances rather than predators. The reality unfolded differently. By 1942 and into 1943, American submarines had transformed into the most efficient weapons of economic warfare ever deployed at sea. Though plagued early by defective torpedoes, once these issues were resolved, the impact became devastating. American boats ranged across thousands of miles, slipping into shipping lanes the Japanese believed secure. They did not seek glory. They sought tonnage. Japanese officers aboard merchant escorts expected to see the enemy before engaging them. They expected smoke, aircraft, radar contacts. Instead, ships began vanishing beneath their feet. One moment a transport steamed alongside them. The next it was gone, split open, sinking in minutes, sometimes seconds. No warning, no visible attacker. Only the echo of explosions through water and steel. Japanese naval records from 1943 onward reveal a shift in tone. Early reports speak confidently of minor losses. Later documents are filled with anxiety. Convoys are described as harassed, roused as unsafe, escorts as insufficient. The emotional contrast was stark. Japanese officers had been taught that the sea was an extension of imperial will. That discipline and resolve could impose order even on chaos. What they experienced instead was helplessness. They could not see the enemy. They could not predict his movements. They could not force him to fight. American submarines embodied a different philosophy of war, one rooted in patience, technology, and industrial abundance. Each boat was a self-contained factory of destruction supplied with food, fuel, torpedoes, and spare parts sufficient to remain at sea for months. While Japanese crews rationed fuel and struggled to protect overstretched shipping, American submariners operated with the quiet confidence that more supplies waited behind them. The recurring symbol of this campaign was sound, or rather, its absence. The sonar ping, the faint hum of propellers, the sudden violent crack of a torpedo detonation followed by silence once more. For Japanese officers, this rhythm became unbearable. The sea no longer felt empty. It felt watched. Historical evidence underscores this psychological shift. By 1944, American submarines were sinking Japanese shipping faster than it could be replaced. Over half of Japan's merchant fleet would be destroyed by submarines alone. Oil tankers, troop transports, food shipments, none were safe. The Japanese Navy, built for decisive surface battles, found itself bleeding slowly, invisibly. One Japanese naval officer later wrote that the greatest terror was not attack, but uncertainty. Ships altered course constantly. zigzagging until crews were exhausted. Escorts dropped depth charges into empty water, hoping rather than knowing. Every ripple suggested danger. Every calm moment felt temporary. The transformation was not merely tactical, it was ideological. Japan's vision of honorable warfare clashed violently with an enemy that refused visibility. American submarines represented a democracy's approach to war, decentralized, adaptive, relentless. They did not seek symbolic victories. They dismantled systems. Food shortages soon followed. Oil reserves dwindled. Factories slowed. Aircraft sat idle for lack of fuel. Sorry. The Japanese home islands, once thought unreachable, began to feel the consequences of a war fought far beyond the horizon. Submarines, unseen and unheard, had severed the arteries of empire. By late 1944, Japanese officers openly acknowledged their fear. Anti-submarine measures increased, but too late. Escorts were rushed into service with minimal training. Aircraft lacked radar. Sonar coverage remained inadequate. The sea had already been lost. American submariners, meanwhile, continued their work with methodical calm. Patrol reports are clinical. Distances measured, tonnage recorded, time noted. The contrast between the violence inflicted and the quiet manner in which it was delivered only deepened its impact. The symbolism of the vanishing submarine became unavoidable. It represented more than a weapon. It represented a system capable of sustaining pressure without spectacle. A democracy whose strength lay not in ceremony, but in continuity. Each submarine that slipped beneath the waves carried not just torpedoes, but the weight of American industry, training, and resolve. As the war neared its end, Japanese officers no longer spoke of victory at sea. They spoke of survival. Convoys shrank, routes shortened, losses mounted. The ocean, once a highway of empire, had become a graveyard. In the epilogue of this story, the image that lingers is not of battle, but of absence. A ship steaming forward unaware, a sudden impact. Then water closing over steel, silence returning, the submarine already gone. This was the lesson carved into the Pacific. That power does not always announce itself, that abundance does not need spectacle, and that freedom, when armed with patience and industry, can reshape even the deepest waters. This psychological collapse was as destructive as any sinking. American submarines became symbols not just of destruction, but of inevitability. Each vanished boat represented continuity. Another patrol, another route denied, another delay imposed. They did not need to win battles. They simply needed to persist, and they did. As Allied forces closed in on Japan, the submarine campaign tightened further. Choke points were mined, straits were watched. Even coastal waters were no longer safe. Japanese shipping hugged shorelines, hoping proximity to land might deter attack. It did not. The ocean, once Japan's strength, had become its weakness. In early 1945, Japanese naval command faced a grim reckoning. Fuel shortages immobilized major fleet units. Battleships sat idle. Aircraft carriers became floating warehouses. The great surface fleet, built for decisive engagement, had been rendered irrelevant by an enemy that refused to be seen. Submarines had rewritten the rules. American commanders understood this transformation. They did not celebrate loudly. There were no grand victory announcements for tonnage sunk. The success of the campaign lay precisely in its quietness. Ships disappeared. Systems failed. The enemy weakened. Silence did the work. When Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, the full scale of submarine warfare's impact became clear. Post-war assessments confirmed that American submarines had sunk more Japanese ships than any other force. They had strangled the economy, starved the military, and isolated the nation. Japanese officers, reflecting years later, often returned to the same image: empty water. A calm sea hiding lethal intent. They had feared visible enemies. They learned too late to fear absence.